Welcome back, everyone, to Thriving with Rachael and Dr. Lou. I wanted to check in on how things went last week. I know we left off with check-ins on how to become more aware. That was kind of the starting point I think we started with of how to make change in our lives and how to move towards thriving was to figure out and be aware of where I'm starting. So we left off with timer check-ins, prompts around the house, things like that. So I want you guys to check in with how that went and kind of see if you need to do more work on that before you check in with this week's, which, do you remember what we talked about? I think we said we were going to start working on shifting from what we don't want to what we do want, I think is where we left off last week. So
a lot of times, we think about what we don't want to do. And so we're trying to focus on not doing that.
Right.
And as we've talked about before, and I'm sure you guys know, the more you try not to do something, the more you think about it, the more you're focused on it, the more invested you are, more energy, and you're still doing it. Mm-hmm. Our approach is focus more on what you really want. And by doing that, the things that you don't want become less and less, and they kind of go into the background.
Do you have an example of, I guess to introduce first what we're talking about, do you have an example on your mind at all about when you maybe get stuck on what you don't want as opposed to what you do?
Well, yeah, think about this whole COVID thing, right? Mm-hmm. One of the biggest adjustments that I've had to make is exercise and focusing on not going to the gym and trying to exercise in some way, different than what was already in my mind in terms of what I think is a workout, right? So trying to think about what I want to do versus what I don't have anymore and can't do was a struggle. I would frequently get frustrated that I'm not going to the gym, I'm not really exercising, so then I would quit that whole week and not exercise and feel blah and not good. So it was really a challenge to stick to a routine or get back into a routine that didn't include what I normally was doing.
Yeah. When you were thinking, I was thinking, I'm sure there's a lot of examples of when we get stuck on what we don't want as opposed to what we do want. And I think that's also something we talked about last week is identifying what it is that we want. And I think I get caught often with maybe if I'm starting something new, I will go into it thinking, don't be anxious. Don't think about whatever you're worried about. And that's exactly what I'll do because I'm so worried about whether or not I'm doing it. So I'll be doing all these skills that we're talking about, and the entire time I'm like, is it working? Am I still anxious? Am I focused? And if we were truly focused on the thing that we wanted, which might be being more confident in the thing that I'm about to do and what that might look like. If I were to focus on that and have that as the visual, I think what we find is that we automatically worry less about whether or not I'm anxious. Because typically, if we're focusing on how to be confident, we might just result in less anxiety.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. I think this plays out in lots of different ways. That's an example. I know it's also, when you were talking about anxiety, I think a lot of times people try not to be anxious, right?
Of course.
Of course.
I don't like anxiety.
And so one of the things that they often will do is use distractions, which are really helpful, very good things to try and do, but they're temporary fixes, if you will, right? If I use a distraction to kind of pull myself out of an anxious situation, it helps in the moment oftentimes, but as soon as I stop doing that distraction, I kind of jump back into that anxiety. So I think it's another reason why we focus on trying to encourage people to do what they want to do, and why that's what we do often, is it's not just about distracting ourselves to kind of keep from doing it enough till we either fall asleep or finally get involved in something else. It's about, let's focus on living life. Let's focus on thriving and enjoying life the way we really want to.
And what that looks like. Because I think sometimes we just think, I want to thrive. And I ask people, I even ask myself, what would that look like if you were to thrive or if you were to be happy? And a lot of times we just say, well, I wouldn't be upset or I wouldn't be anxious. And it's like, well, that's what wouldn't exist, but what would exist? I think,
although that exists too, even when you're thriving, right?
Which is my point.
Yeah.
So that can't be the definition. It also doesn't define something that's measurable or something that I know if I attained it. Like, how would you know if you had it? I think a lot of times with things like losing weight, for instance, we might go into something and say, oh, well, I really want to lose this weight. And so we'll be going on this diet that we hate and we feel like we're missing out on everything. And we have to go home and do this workout that we're too tired to do. And so the whole time we're kind of powering through, wondering if it's working, wondering if I'm losing the weight. And we're not focusing on the fact that, eating better or, going to sleep on time or moving actually in and of itself makes me feel pretty good. We kind of bypass that because we're so focused on the fact that I really want a brownie instead of this chicken, and I really want to just go hang out and lay down as opposed to doing this workout. We're not focused on that process, I think, and in the moment of what I want now and where that might get me, I guess. So.
I think sometimes, as you were saying that, we get so focused on the end goal.
Right, the outcome?
The outcome, rather than the actual goal. Right? Like, it's really important, I think, to think about what we're doing, when we're doing it, and trying to make conscious, intentional decisions as to why we're doing that.
Right. Rather
than just focusing on the end goal. Like, the whole example of dieting, right? People have the goal or the outcome, wanting the outcome to be, I lose 10 pounds, 20 pounds, whatever it is. But they put themselves through this whole torturous event for days, weeks, months to get to that.
Right.
Rather than enjoying eating healthy or going for a walk or exercising or playing tennis or doing something that really enhances your life and helps you lose weight.
Right. Just so it happens to.
Yeah.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
And I think we get caught up in that because we're not in the process, which I think, people always say, and I still roll my eyes, even though I agree, is like, oh, it's a lifestyle change. It's not just you're losing weight. And I'm like, oh, yeah,
but
yeah.
It is, right?
But they're not wrong. They're absolutely not wrong. But I think I roll my eyes so often because I think we have an association with lifestyle change as this thing that I can't ever have because it's too hard. It's too consistent. It's forever. And that can be scary sometimes. So I think we tend to focus on the outcome because then we're like, oh, if we get that, then it feels like this big success. But how many times have we made it there?
But then what?
Exactly.
Right? Are you going to stop doing what you're doing now that you've... So many times I've done that.
Oh, I know. I was going to say, this is my own experience. This is not...
Yeah,
this isn't hypothetical.
I can't tell you how many times I've done keto or I've done this or done that.
Mediterranean
lose
diet,
the weight, feel great, and then it's like, oh, well, now I can go back to whatever.
Yeah, I've been doing so good, so I can just go do my own thing.
Yeah.
Which is like, wait a minute, these are the things that actually got me here. These are the things that made it better. I think, speaking of COVID, when you brought that up earlier, I think that was one thing that really hit me hard. I was like, oh my gosh, this is actually a really cool thing because I get to sleep in. I don't have to drive anywhere. I have all this extra money. And then what I started doing was sleeping in, which made me really sluggish to start my day, and it did not get me off on a good foot. Or I would save this money and be like, oh, I'm going to go spend this money. And like I wouldn't be saving. So there's these things that happened that I actually realized, even though getting up is hard sometimes in the morning, it was something that started my day. It was something that was really important to get me going in the morning. And when I didn't have that, or I didn't keep myself accountable for that, I think I lost sight of the whole purpose because I always assumed, oh, well, it's to get me to work.
Right.
As opposed to actually it gets me really ready for the day.
It's funny you said that because last week I think I mentioned that I actually just joined the gym again.
Yeah.
And I've been going a couple times now. Hasn't been as frequent as I normally would, but I've gone a couple times, and today I went again, and the amount of energy that I felt from it because of it just feels good to be doing something that I enjoy so much. And to get back to that is so nice.
Yeah.
To finally kind of get back to, I hate when people keep saying get back to this normal.
Yeah.
With the old normal, whatever that is. It's really important though, to me, to do those things as much as I can throughout the day to really feel good. And I think so many times we think about what we want to do and we know that it's going to make us feel good, but we don't do it.
Well, because I think the process to get there is really hard.
Yeah.
Like I think I mentioned a couple weeks ago, I sprained my back, so I've been in physical therapy, just kind of doing that every day, and that was my new norm for a while. And I got released probably a week and a half ago to go back and do anything that I wanted to just test out to see how I was doing. I've done it one time in like 10 days. Yeah. And I've been kicking myself because I'm like, well, you got all this clearance and you weren't doing it because they said you couldn't. And it's like, and then I'm like, well, maybe you're not doing it because you're just lazy and you just can't get, and then it starts.
Notice that cycle,
so
right?
fast. Yeah. And it's been key. Even today I'm like, okay, I'm going to work out. I'm going to do it. I've pushed it probably 3 times. I'm going to do it after this. Hold me accountable. But I'm not picturing it, as what it's going to feel like. That feeling that you just described, that's not how I'm picturing it. I'm picturing it as, I don't have time. I have to fit it back in. It's not part of my schedule anymore because I shifted it to not be part of my schedule. So that discomfort, like you were talking about, the process of getting to this place of, oh, this feels so good, which I know, I recognize because I've done it before and I love it. Getting there, for some reason, is just extremely hard because of that change factor, right? The discomfort in the change, I think.
So many things came to mind as you were talking about that. One was the whole idea of getting to that place of how it will feel.
Right.
But knowing how it's going to feel in the process of getting there, right, is such a deterrent for so many of us. And I think that's something that once we push through, once we start those steps, taking a few steps,
style,
it definitely creates that energy, and it keeps the ball rolling. And we do create this sense of motion that allows us to get going to that place where we want to end up. The other thing was that when you're talking about having like these excuses in our head, how often do we use those excuses to just not do it? Right? It's not only a physical sensation that we don't want to experience. It's a mental game that we play in our head. The other thing you pointed out was hold me accountable. You said that. It's so helpful to have somebody with you to hold you accountable. You know, not all of us have that. Not all of us have those supports. And that's really hard sometimes to find somebody who actually is a support. And I know we often go off on tangents when we have these meetings and talk. And with support, sometimes we have people in our life who are, you would think are supports because they're a spouse, they're a parent, they're a friend. And that doesn't always mean that they're the support you need for this particular...
Like that friend who's like, I'm going to hold you accountable. We're both going to go to the gym. But instead they're like, do you want to go get ice cream? And I'm like, yeah, I do. Yeah. We all have those.
Right.
But you're right. Maybe people who you think should support you or could support you in one way, but maybe haven't been that person. So kind of like we talked about several weeks ago with your values of family and support and how maybe you have to shift your visual around that. Yeah, you're right.
So we started today talking about how do you move from thinking more about what you want to do as opposed to not thinking about what you don't want to do. And there's a few different things that we just identified. You know, having supports, changing the visual, being able to push through and realize what it's going to feel like once we get a little bit of momentum going, right? And last week we were talking about timers, to be aware of what we're doing and to schedule that. I'm wondering, what else is really helpful to get us moving and focused more on what we want? You have some ideas on that?
Well, I guess one thing with the awareness piece of where we left off last week was this idea of noticing, when we're aware, are we stuck in, I guess, looking back, or are we stuck in looking at what we don't want? And if that's the case, which a lot of times for a lot of us it is, because we're very aware of what's uncomfortable, not so much what we want, which is comfort, is to ask ourselves and be able to challenge ourselves in that moment of, okay, if this didn't exist, what would? So like I started off today, if I don't want to be anxious, okay, well, what would I be? What would exist? Because something else has to be in that visual. So maybe it's confidence. Maybe it's, I would know how to navigate the anxiety differently. And so that's something I really want to take a little bit of time today to talk about is, if I could identify what I want, the next obstacle, I guess, to that is maybe not thinking I can have it. And I think that's the next place that a lot of us get stuck. So first, it's lack of awareness, so becoming aware. Second, it's identifying what I do want as opposed to what I don't want. And then the next step I really think is, instead of saying I want this and then instantly, I can't have it, recognizing what are the barriers. What might be the barriers to having this? So, for instance, when I sprain my back, I am usually a very active person, and I like having a specific time of day that I take time for myself, whether I go to work out, go for a walk, whatever it might be, and that wasn't something that I could do right now. And so having to kind of step back and evaluate, what do I want? Of course, my answer is I don't want my back to be sprained, and I want to be able to do the workouts the way I want to do them. And then coming to terms with what would exist given this circumstance. What would I want given my circumstances in this moment?
So that's that shift.
Right. As opposed to fighting where I wish I was and I'm not. which I think we get caught in often.
Well, that's that black and white, right? That all or nothing.
All or nothing.
If it can't be exactly the way it's been, the way I want, well then I guess I can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
So finding the middle ground, finding a little bit of gray, changing the dynamic, the perspective, the visual, just a little bit, creating that shift allows us to have an opening. It gives us room to start moving in another direction. It gets around the wall of yes, but.
Right.
So if we were to get around that wall, if we change that visual, we're naturally going to go back and forth with that, right? It's easy to say it.
Yeah.
But so often the other things keep talking in our head, keep coming up. The whole yes buts, the whole but it's not as good as, the whole I don't think I can, the comparisons of what it was, what it could be, how others are. We do so much of that, and again, it kind of circles back to awareness, right? We have to tune in and say, oh, we're doing that thing again.
Right.
We need to get back on track. And again, that's where accountability comes in. The support of others can help us with that. Having reminders, timers, schedulers, these are all things that we just keep using. We keep circulating through them, and it is a way of life, right? It's not just a mindset, it's a way of being day to day. And I think that's important for us to keep trying and allow us to have some grace. You know, when we go down that road that we don't want to, it's okay. It's not the end of the world.
It doesn't feel okay.
It doesn't feel okay. And I'm okay.
And I'm okay.
You know, we talked about that before, right? The difference between feeling okay and being okay, right? It's important for us to keep reminding ourselves that it's okay, even if I do fall off the wagon, even if I do have that piece of cake or that ice cream, or I don't work out today, right? We don't have to live in these have to, should have worlds that kind of demand this all or nothing way of looking at things.
But I think that's where we get stuck, mainly because it's clear. So even though we talk a lot about all or nothing, black and white, and how we should maybe move more towards the gray, I think it's more definitive to stay in black and white, and that's why a lot of times we stay there. I either work out to the full capacity or I don't work out at all. And I think that makes sense to me. It makes sense because I know what going all in looks like, and I know what sitting on the couch looks like. That happy medium, it's hard for my mind to make sense of that sometimes, and it's hard for my mind to feel like it's good enough. And so I think if I don't categorize that as good enough, it also often doesn't feel like it's worth doing.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, where we get stuck, I think, in that all or nothing. I'm not sure if you agree with that. But.
Well, definitely. When you were talking about the good enough, I was thinking about personal expectations, expectations that others may have of us, or that we perceive they have of us.
Right.
And that often puts us into that black and white way of thinking, because it's not good enough, or it's not meeting that expectation or their expectation. And so that's when we feel the defeat. That's when we feel I can't. That's when we feel like this is too much. And sometimes we just shut down because of that. So how do you get over that? How do you get past that? How do you get around that? How do you know that that's just part of the process and it's okay? You know, I don't know if you were going to respond to that, but I was thinking that so many times we start to have that momentum of doing well, but then we get sidetracked, right? And sometimes that sidetrack takes us down this path, and the detour is so long. It's like, you know, it could be weeks.
Yeah.
Like you said, it's been, what, 10 days since you got released?
Yeah.
What happened to the awareness? Like 1 day, 2 days, 4 days?
And I was so excited. I had momentum.
Yeah.
And then I get to it and I was like, I didn't even think about it. It did not even occur to me. Hence the lack of awareness, right?
Yeah.
I didn't do check-ins. I didn't do prompts. I didn't have anybody holding me accountable. And so I think that was, again, a big barrier. I wasn't aware. I didn't identify or have a vision for my day of what it would look like with this workout in it again. I think I just kind of succumbed almost to the idea that, oh, well, you can't do that. So don't make it a part of your day. Fill your day with so many things so you don't even notice that you're missing out on that, so you don't become disappointed, right? And so I think I got caught up in that for a longer period of time than I than I had planned. But I agree with you. I think giving yourself grace and compassion along the way is really important. I think oftentimes when I ask people, how do you get over that hump? Most people feel like, including myself, that you have to believe that it's possible first. And if we've never experienced things like that to be possible before, or we've been out of it so long, like you said, I don't know that that's going to be the first thing that comes to mind. So one thing that I would encourage everyone, instead of just saying, having to get to a place where you believe it's possible or you believe you're worth it or whatever it might be, maybe just stepping back and asking yourself, well, what if it is? You don't need to be in a mindset where you think everything's going to be great, because that can't be the starting point sometimes. And I don't know that that's where most of us start. I think we're disappointed or dissatisfied first. So to go from that to feeling all in, confident, I got this, I don't know if that's the starting point. Yeah, so I guess that's where the grace comes in, of recognizing, like the tug of war that you described, is that, I'm going to kick myself sometimes. It's not going to be an easy road. But once I get started, maybe I'm going to have some glimpses of some successes. And maybe that's enough to, give me momentum moving forward. Or, maybe I just need to try again tomorrow, or kind of review that vision, I guess, and redo that. I don't know if you have any thoughts on, how to navigate that also, or if you agree.
Well, definitely agree. And I think, one of the most difficult pieces that I struggle with at times is that beating yourself up in the moment and having a hard time getting back on track, like you were just talking about. And couple things. I think it's important to realize that everybody does this. We all go through this process, right? Even therapists,
I sure hope
right?
So, 'cause
even people that you think have it all together, I guarantee you go through this. And they have struggles with awareness and getting back on track and falling off, and it's important to recognize that you're not alone. This is not just you, and that you can do it. How I try to get around it is to recognize the times that I've gotten around it. I think so often we get focused on the times we got stuck and replay that kind of keeps us stuck. It feeds the belief that we can't, that it's too much, that I'm not good enough, that we're not meeting these expectations. Yet there's a lot of evidence in everybody's life, I believe, that proves you can do it. Now, I know a lot of times people will say, but there's more evidence that supports...
I have a laundry list over here. Yeah.
Let's say that's true. Let's say that most of the time I fail. That still means that sometimes I don't. Or sometimes I succeed. Even a better way of looking at it, right? If I tend to focus on the times that I succeed, I change my mindset, I change my visual, I change my energy level and direction, and that feeds itself to keep me on that track, on that path. And the more I stay on that path, the more I start to see those positives and reinforce that, and it just builds on itself.
But I think that takes a lot of intention. And so I think that's something that maybe for this next week, if we want to start working on, is being intentional about what we're paying attention to and what we're doing. So I want to continue, I think, the accountability and the awareness that we talked about from last week. So if you're still needing that, which I think most of the time we need that for a good bit, probably forever, to be honest, obviously, is that we want to keep those going. So whether that's an accountability partner, whether that's a timer check-in, prompts around your house with sticky notes, whatever it might be, ask if you have questions about what that looks like. But awareness, I think, needs to still be first. Identifying what it is that you want, noticing when maybe you're getting stuck on what you don't, and intentionally noticing the verbiage that's coming to mind when you're in the change process. So a lot of times, like I mentioned today, I got really stuck on the fact that I still haven't gotten back to what I wanted to do. And yeah, I could come up with a laundry list of when I have done it before, and that sounds great in theory. But my and then what, or my yeah but mind always wins, because it comes back and says, yeah, but you still haven't done it, so this time is different and you're not going to be able to succeed like last time. Notice when that's happening. You can, like you said, you can stay on that track and you can invest in that type of verbiage or in that type of thought process. Or you can add to that story. Yes, I'm stuck, and I still want to get back to what I want to do, or I still want to do this thing, even if it's not something I've ever done before. And so I want us to maybe challenge ourselves for the next week to really notice that. Notice when the verbiage or the thought patterns that I have is maybe less helpful in achieving the goals that I'm setting out for, and noticing that I have the power to add to the story, not negate it, right? So when I feel stuck, that's still there. That's not going anywhere. I can be stuck and still want something to happen. So noticing that they can coexist, and I can invest more energy in the one that's more helpful if I'm aware and can do so. Anything you want to add?
Just that maybe next week we can elaborate more on how those two can coexist. The idea of being stuck and feeling like I can still move on.
Mm-hmm.
I think we just need to talk about how things can coexist, especially emotions that tend to seem so opposite.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great idea. So maybe that's where we'll pick up next week. Also in 2 weeks, just a reminder, we are going to have a live session where we're going to have actually real people just come on the podcast.
Some of you guys who wanted to be part of this.
So ask questions, and anybody can call in, type in, whatever is easier. We are going to host a couple people. So the first maybe 2 or 3 people that call in and say they'd like to be on, we're going to have those people hosted to basically ask questions about the podcast thus far. And if there's any other questions, if you don't want to be on the show, but you would like to maybe participate in some way, feel free. It is going to be at 7 p.m. on Wednesday in 2 weeks, but stay tuned for next week, which is going to be a pre-recorded session that'll also be posted at 7 on Wednesday.
Great. Have a good week, everybody.
See you next week.